Okay, so here is my next prompt. I'm saying the episode arc is perfect. For names, let's go with Ryan and Priya. To keep things interesting, let's give Priya an English accent, mainly relevant for the text-to-speech step later, but might influence her word choice as well. I think that'll be kind of interesting to have, and it'll give us a chance to play a little bit with different accents with these voices. They should be able to handle that quite well, actually. So it's a little bit of an experiment. Then I say, I suggest building this similar to the image generation. One step to generate the podcast script step, and another step to generate the actual podcast audio step. Let's start with just the script step for now, and we'll come back to the second step later. That way, I can test the generated step in Google AI Studio to pick the appropriate voices for the TTS model. Again, it often helps to give Claude some reason why you want something a certain way. So that's what I'm doing here. We'll need a new model, podcast. The usual base table pattern mainly stores the script as well as estimated duration, plus repository tests, Alembic migration. Go ahead and implement the podcast script step and model, etc. I don't think we need plan mode here. The structure is pretty well established, and we can just iterate on the system prompt and so on as needed. Actually, maybe one little tweak. Okay, let's say put this in a new podcast module. I think that's good enough, right? Because we broke up the steps class into individual models for ideation and so on. And I think podcast deserves its own. Maybe call it podcast pipeline module to be explicit. What's it running here? Sure. Okay, Claude finished. This took a little while. Let's see. Pipeline podcast.py, podcast script step with a full system prompt, encoding Ryan and Priya's personas, the 5-part episode arc, 550-word target, and the rally ending convention. We have some new tests. We have a migration, and then modified these existing files. Okay, it's actually telling us it didn't run the migration, so we'll have to remember to do that before we run this step. Let's take a quick look at the files here. I'm going to close this. Looks like it updated claude.md as well, which is always nice. I didn't specifically tell it to, but there is a general instruction here to keep it updated. So that's very nice. It appended the podcast script here to the list of steps. AI generates a 4-minute podcast script as a conversation between two hosts. Okay, great. Writes to output/podcast script.txt. Yeah, that's not a bad idea, actually. We'll presumably store it in the database too, but since we already have the newsletter itself there, might as well write the script as its own artifact. And then here it picked the model. I also didn't prompt for a specific model, but Gemini 2.5 Pro makes perfect sense here. So that's good. Migration should be straightforward. So we have a new podcasts table with a script and estimated duration in seconds. Okay, let's look at the model to go along with that. Makes sense. So the script, duration, the usual database fields. Then we have CLI. We'll just add the step in here. Repositories. It's just going to be the usual pattern. This is interesting. Yeah, so it added a getRunById function to the newsletter post repository, presumably because I didn't actually tell it what to base the script on, but I'm assuming it based it on the actual newsletter post, which makes perfect sense. So that's here. And then the podcast repository, no surprises there. So the meat of it is going to be in this file, of course. The tests are going to be pretty clear. Have our own test file. And then, okay, podcast. So we have a podcast script output here. And then we have the podcast script step. Let's take a look. Oh, that's a very thorough system prompt. Okay, let's take a look here. You are writing a podcast script for Idea Pipeline. Oh yeah, we didn't actually come up with a name. That's as good as any. Let's keep that. A daily, roughly 4-minute podcast that accompanies a startup idea newsletter aimed at solo developers and indie hackers. The podcast has 2 hosts. Okay, now we're defining our hosts. So Ryan, the opportunity hunter, 2x founder, 1 exit, 1 expensive education. So that's basically what we already brainstormed. I don't have to reread all the text, but that's detailed. I was envisioning more of a structured description, perhaps, of each host, right? More like a focus colon, blah, 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 mannerisms colon, blah, blah, blah. So here it's a little bit more freeform in text. Let's keep it like this, see what the result looks like. If need be, we can always structure it a bit more formally. So then we define the episode arc that we want, follow this structure strictly. Okay, so that's what we talked about. The hook, the idea, the interrogation, the unlock, the rally. They close with genuine enthusiasm. Target length, about 550 words. Format, plain text only, alternate, Ryan. So I didn't tell it exactly what this should look like. It's pretty clear what to expect for a podcast script, right? It's just name colon text, name colon text. So it intuited that, and then it made it explicit here. So alternate Ryan colon and Priya colon speaker labels on their own line before each turn. No stage directions, no parentheticals, no markdown, no blank lines between turns. That's good as well. I actually had to correct this in my previous stab at podcast implementation. At some point, this step actually spit out a direction like intro music fades or something like that. And then the resulting audio, since there wasn't any music to fade, they literally just read that direction. So that was kind of funny, and I ended up having to add a very similar line to the system prompt to avoid that. So it's kind of nice that it got ahead of that, actually. Not sure why we have no blank lines between turns. I think it's actually a lot more readable if we do have a blank line. So I'm going to just tweak this. 1 blank line between turns. I think that's better, more human readable. Okay, tone. Loose, funny, occasionally riffing, but always following the arc. Like 2 sharp friends who've done this 100 times. The newsletter has already vetted the idea. The podcast's job is to make it feel exciting and inevitable. Okay? Now, the rest of the implementation shouldn't be surprising, I think. So for inputs, it looks like it loads the business model, the candidate, and the actual newsletter post. Okay. And then let's look at format prompt. I see. So it actually passes all of this in as input. That's probably good. That way they have enough signal to base this on, not necessarily only what ended up in the final markdown output. So we have the startup name, the one-liner, why now, target customer, problem, solution, value prop, revenue streams, go-to-market, unfair advantage, competitors. So all of this very structured information that ultimately led to the podcast post. And then we have the podcast itself for tone and framing reference. That's perfect. So process, that's straightforward. The one thing it does at the end is it takes the output, counts the number of words, and then based on that estimates the word count based on this words per second estimate. So that'll be helpful. Then we store it as the podcast. And then, no surprises here. I guess the one interesting thing being, like we talked about, it stores it both in the database and the podcasts table, but it also writes this script as a file. Very nice. We get some output. Okay, that looks perfect.